Hi, everybody. And do we have Gagan with us as well online? I think we do. There you
Hey,
are. Hi, Gagan. Hello, everybody. I'm Nicole Rycroft. I'm the founder and executive director of Canopy. We are a solutions-driven, not-for-profit organization, and we work to protect the world's forests, species, and climate, and help advance frontline community rights. And we do that by transforming supply chains that are currently driving deforestation and forest degradation, including sectors like the viscose supply chain or the man-made cellulosic textile supply chain, the paper packaging supply chain, and the pulp industry. We work with just under 900 large corporate customers of those commodities, including 550 fashion brands. I'm very excited for today's discussion. I think there's a lot that has been learnt over the past 12 months within kind of what it takes to scale next-gen solutions, and that's going to be the focus of this conversation today. With a particular focus in on what is often the elephant in the room, which is pricing, and the fact that these first-to-market pioneering solutions often come with a premium, at least over the short to medium term. And so really it's like how our brands, how our conventional producers and enablers in the space working together to actually help us move over that hump of initial kind of pricing premiums associated with first-to-market pioneers. So I'm super excited for this conversation. It's front and center of everything to do with innovation, and I'm joined by a really kind of spectacular cast of characters for the next 45 minutes. So online, we have Gagan Bansal. Gagan, thanks for joining us. I know that it's getting late your time, but Gagan is the head of material innovation strategy for H&M Group and spearheads much of the group's scouting and testing of innovative materials, and we'll hear more from Gagan in a minute. Next to me immediately, Frans Jooste, who is the investment manager at Fashion for Good and oversees Fashion for Good's direct investment portfolio as well as scouting and building investment community. Sucharu Uppal, who is the joint vice president of brand and retail with Aditya Birla, and does a lot of work with Aditya Birla Group's innovation portfolio and brokering between Birla Cellulose as one of the world's largest viscose producer and brand and retailers' needs. And then last but not least, we have Emily Macintosh, who's a senior policy officer with the European Environmental Bureau, which has 180 member organizations, if I'm correct, in over 40 countries. And Emily, you were engaged directly on the EU textile strategy, circularity strategy, if I remember. Yeah. So we're going to dive in, and the topic of the conversation is getting real on price. What's it going to take to scale next gen? And Gagan, I'm going to come to you to kick us off. H&M has been a major supporter of next-gen solutions, of innovation in the fashion industry more broadly. You've both invested directly, you've kind of engaged in off-takes and trials and product pull-through. Can you talk a little bit about how H&M is tackling price premiums from an operational perspective?
great. Thanks, Nicole, for that question. And straight jumping into how do we tackle that, I think we start with setting up the goals and the KPIs. So 2020, we had set the goal that we will head towards 30% recycle by 2025. And that's one of the goals that internally everybody in the organization had. And today, when standing in 2024, we are already on 24% recycled materials. So this is one part of internal work that started in 2020. And now when we are standing in 2024, we have already put an ambition that we want to double our recycled materials and we want to head towards 50% recycle, aim towards 50% recycle, although we know that innovative technologies are currently developing by 2030. So this is one part of the work which needs to be done from the top, from the strategy, and then we move forward. Everybody in the organization has the same goal to work towards. And then the work that is external, which is how do we support the innovators from different stages, whether it's start, where H&M Foundation supports the very early innovators through the philanthropic money that they provide and support them. Then we work towards Circular Innovation Lab, which helps the innovators to come and show that yes, the product is possible with the right quality, and it could be 5, 10 kgs or 50 kgs of a fabric. And then comes down to the production, which is what we are going to discuss today. And in all these phases, money and investment and time is required. You need full effort towards those innovators because they can't do it all alone. The last part that I just referred to was the production, where the scaling up of innovation is with the amount and the volumes that is required for that innovation to take up to a level where they can start, from a certain level, which is higher premium, and then reach a certain level, which is acceptable at a commercial stage for that particular innovation. So what do we do in H&M? First of all, as I said, we set the goal. Second of all, we support the innovators with connecting them to the supply chain partners so that they can actually create the product that the buyers are really asking for. And thirdly, by committing to them, by making sure that we have commitments towards volumes, with definitely at the beginning at a premium prices and then going down as the scale up increases. But while I say this, with this internal and external, I think there is a lot of work that is required externally because only one brand cannot take this forward. Although we can take it as a big brand, but we need other philanthropic organizations, brands, government to come forward and help the scale up, because this scale up is actually required for the innovators to reach a commercial stage, because one brand cannot take it all. And that's the struggle which we all need to understand, that accept initial premiums but then help the innovators to reach the scale up plans and come together and then finally reach a level which is commercially acceptable on the terms of prices.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Gagan, that point around, like, no single company can transform a supply chain all by themselves, right? And it's not, no one part of the ecosystem can transform a supply chain by themselves either. This is a relay race, and the other kind of participants in the relay need to be willing to and ready to take the baton as it's handed over, recognizing that the ultimate result is as strong as that handoff and all members within the race. I'm wondering, excuse me, could you speak a little bit about, not only from a performance perspective with KPIs, but how, and maybe it was linked to the business goals, how you navigated in H&M around kind of finding the budget for the first market premiums that are associated with some of these products?
So there are different ways to it because different innovators have different approaches. We have inbuilt, first of all, the plan. As I said, the business goal itself drives the price if it's required to be paid as premiums. So business teams have the goals already inbuilt where they need to spend extra money towards those goals. Plus, we also have green investments, which supports extra premiums. If it's really high and the product teams are not able to get those money in their budgets, then the green investment supports them in the initial pricing for that premium to be taken care of, and then it moves forward as the prices come to a certain level. So these kind of internal working within the organization is very, very important to take it forward. Otherwise, it's always back and forth, and no buyer will go and say, okay, now I'm ready to pay 20% higher, sure, 30% higher. So those internal goals within the budgeting has to be set.
And then Gagan, H&M can't change a supply chain all by themselves, but there are obviously many smaller brands in the space and in the audience today. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak about how in your conversations with other brands that are in the space that are smaller, how kind of the work, perhaps some of the lessons learnt within H&M can potentially be applied to brands that are smaller in size?
Yeah, I think with the big brand, the ownership and the responsibility and the funding becomes one area and which we are ready to take. But I also hear when I'm in the forums, the smaller brands are not able to give the volumes, which I think is one of the reasons also because only big brand cannot take it. There would be 20 small brands who have to come together to, build the volume of an innovator. So I personally, and this is something that I think we have been discussing, Nicole.
Yeah.
I think we need to collaborate a lot. There has to be forums where all the small brands can see, can visualize that this kind of a material is existing, and they can just chip in. So these are the things that we need to start working in the industry, which today I think every brand is of their own. So these are all new things, and this is a new way of learning towards how to bring innovations in the scale up arena.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe I'll pick up on your last point there, which was a thread throughout your comments, Gagan, and we've heard it in the investor session earlier as well, which is this theme of collaboration which keeps coming up. And Sucharu, maybe I can go to you, and recognizing that this is a, generally fiercely competitive value chain. And so collaboration hasn't necessarily been kind of like the, one of the automatic values that people would associate with the mode of operating. But can you speak a little bit from your perspective within Aditya Birla as one of the world's largest fiber producers? How can the industry better align, or what are the kind of steps that are needed, the ways of working that are different, so that we can actually help achieve better scale of production, lower, more competitive pricing?
So when we're working with next-gen materials, we all have to recognize that this is not a run-of-the-mill that you can put it into your supply chain and it's going to roll regularly. As Gagan has also mentioned, it has to be curated, crafted, and then kind of, given to the supply chain for adoption. Now, what happens is that when there's a new material in the market, we as a fiber producer have made the material, but unless the value chains, which I mean the spinners or the weavers, the knitters, the dyers, printers, the garment makers, they've all really worked with it, they wouldn't be confident in adoption of that material. So why I say this is the more the varied number of, we know the garmenting supply chains and the apparel supply chains are very wide, the more the SKUs or the more the number of inception material. For example, a brand may come to us and say, we want 10% recycled content in the fiber. Another might say 30, another might say 50. That means we at the inception are starting out with 3 feedstocks ready to go in the supply chain, which then is a geometric progression of mixing with, say, cotton or with polyester. So can you think of the number of variants that we're already putting out there? And you just spoke about consolidation. So this is the anti. So if we can have everybody rally around and say, if it's a new material, let's aim for a 20, 30%, let's stabilize the market there and build up volumes. That will be good for the innovator because they'll have, dedicated pulp volumes that they need to fit in. We'll have dedicated runs that we're able to run longer instead of individual capsule runs and put out there in the market. That's the support we would need from the larger industry. It will help to holistically build up volumes and scale for the fiber.
So, Frans, maybe to you, picking up on what Sucharu just said, as innovators are building out their business cases, right, like they're looking to work with conventional producers, a key kind of that kind of handoff of material, the ultimate customer for their product. How long should they be thinking of a premium being part of their scale-up or business model? And have you done any work with innovators around and with the market around, how much is too much?
So As an investor, the short answer is as short as possible, because the reality is the quicker you can get to price parity, the quicker you can have adoption. I think the reality is there will be a form of a premium initially, and perhaps then the line in the sand should be as soon as an innovator is saying that they are building their first commercial facility, when that facility reaches capacity, if that is a commercial facility, they should be operating on commercial terms. And I think that's where you need to start drawing a line and saying, okay, that is where we have to target. Now, it obviously is a little bit more complex than that. And I think we can all appreciate that there might be a bit of a premium. And from some of the discussions I've had with either investors or brands, there potentially is appetite to have a bit of a premium, but then there has to be a performance benefit to them. There has to be a way for them to justify paying a slightly higher price, where they can say to their customers, look, we are having to charge you a bit more, but it's because of X, Y, and Z, and you are getting this benefit. I'm not including impact in that, because I think we all assume that over time,
Sure.
all materials should have that impact benefit. In terms of how big that could be, the premium, it would probably depend a little bit from brand to brand, who their customers are, what their customers are willing to absorb. But in reality, it has to be as close to parity with the incumbent as possible. I think in terms of managing that that premium, and it's something that both of you have alluded to, if we can reduce the additional costs as early in the supply chain as possible, that would have the biggest impact, because the reality is it is a lengthy supply chain that these materials have to go through. And everybody has to add a margin. There are shipping costs involved, import taxes, VAT, all those kinds of things. And all of that can have an exponential impact on the actual premium itself. So if we can offset that premium or try and minimize it as much as possible from the outset, then that'll help us to reach parity. And I know we've been discussing and working on an initiative around a next-gen transition and how we can potentially look to source a pool of capital that can help offset those initial premiums earlier in the supply chain. I think similar to what Gagan has mentioned, what H&M have created their own buckets for.
Right. And I think your point there, Frans, around the need to help offset as early in the supply chain as possible, and then Sucharu, your point around, so that because these are new materials, they're good quality, but they perform slightly differently than the materials that the value chain has optimized around over the last 80 to 150 years. And so there is a need for adjustment in processing, refinement of processing. And so I think your point, Sucharu, around also ensuring that there is kind of as much of a kind of coalescing of demand, right? Like agreeing to a single blend, right? We're used to being able to, have 5% or 50% and everywhere else in between, but that requires additional costs at for Birla or for the other conventional producers that are running these innovative and new materials. And then the same at the spinner, the same at the dyeing level. And so I think that coalescence in combination with what kind of transition sort of support and funding can be helped to defray the initial costs associated at the innovator stage because of the lack of commercialization quite compared to the rest of the conventional supply chain, along with these kind of later stage innovations or kind of economies of scale. So Sucharu, in terms of the kind of performance benefit that Frans was just speaking to, how do you think about that at Birla?
So we were also just talking about that. The thing is, there's a degree of customer education that needs to get built up in this space, and I'll start from there and I'll come back to what Birla is working back towards. So if the customer knows meaningfully what's happening to the garment that's being turned in, and therefore how is it coming back, the afterlife, And I think that's a space where there's been, a backdrop of greenwashing, but how does that cohesively answer his or her curiosity and is answering to the need of how meaningfully is the garment being turned around? So that's one impact point of view that I want to put out there. Now, from us as a fiber producer, our commitment is that any next generation material we will bring out there in the market will be good to go to be used in the rest of the supply chain without any additional capital expenditure. So, to exactly your point, does the cost therefore need padding on each and every time if the material is nearly or equally as good? And that's the point that Birla has been very, very focused on the technical specs and the quality. We spend enough time on the R&D, multiple rounds of R&D, pilot scale trialing, bringing it to a 1-ton line, 5-ton line, then a 10-ton line, so we are scaling up. So the big point here is how to build it up for scalability so that the price impact is reduced right at the inception, is minimized instead of doing multiple capsule runs of, of different kind of materials, but to consolidate the volumes and then to push it through the supply chains where they're not cost adding. I must mention a very important point here is a very close collaboration and work between the brand and the fiber producer like ourselves so that we are kind of steering this through, ensuring that the price volumes are not really added on every stage, and also providing technical support and R&D for any new material solutions in terms of blending, in terms of runnability that need to be given in the supply chain. So these are all some of the steps towards impact.
Right. Emily, I want to bring you into the conversation, and Gagan, I haven't forgotten, you're right in front of us. But Emily, obviously everybody's in this room is very aware that it's a very dynamic regulatory landscape at the moment, both here in the UK as well as in Europe and in other jurisdictions around the world. And as that kind of many of those policies and regulations are coming into effect, obviously brands are kind of planning, shifting their business practices and their supply chains to handle that. But notably at this point, there's an absence of government in the kind of incentives or really actively enabling that commercialization phase. Good work being done in the earlier stages. And so I'm just wondering, what are your conversations circling around in terms of that kind of government agency within the commercialization space?
Yeah, so maybe I can just introduce a little bit where I'm coming from to this conversation because
Sure.
I'm from the European Environmental Bureau, so we follow EU policies. So we've been, many of you maybe know, there's the EU textile strategy, which was signed off by the European Parliament in 2023, and this is something that we and our member organizations or NGOs based around Europe were campaigning for. And it's really interesting to hear, from different value chain actors working, not necessarily in the policy space, because the main parts of the textile strategy has these big political aims to sort of end fast fashion and reduce overproduction, overconsumption. And the two main pillars of the textile strategy, the two main legislative pillars, are a revision of the Waste Framework Directive, so EU waste laws, and also eco-design regulation. So I can talk a bit about the waste side first of all. So we've already heard it mentioned in the previous panel, the extended producer responsibility, and I think that is really where I see the most momentum in terms of actually having an impact on pricing and how policy can drive the incentives. So very briefly, if anyone doesn't know, EPR is it's a policy to bring responsibility, financial and organizational, on companies for the products they put on the market after they become waste. Typically, it's used for waste management. So what we've been campaigning for, and what many in the industry as well, there's really a push to use this policy to go beyond waste management and actually change change the market in the first place. So, and something that quite exciting happened last week, the EU government signed off on their position on the revision of the Waste Framework Directive, and in that they actually improved the European Commission's initial proposal on an aspect in terms of eco-modulation. So I won't go into too much jargon, but basically the eco-modulation mechanism is how you define the fees. So if you're a brand and you pay into a producer responsibility scheme, the idea of eco-modulation is that if you we can use that, we, the policymakers, can define what is incentivized and what is disincentivized, essentially. So, and in the text that they adopted, they introduced the idea of quantities, so looking really into overproduction, so I think that's really positive. And also, they mentioned the notion of extrinsic durability. And this is also sometimes described as emotional durability. This has also already been touched on in the previous panel, but we know that only a third of clothes are discarded due to wear and tear or due to, being worn out. So how can we actually, develop some criteria that looks at the business practices and the commercial practices, advertising, social media strategies. And I think where that's relevant for next-gen fibres is really how to make sure that we're integrating next-gen fibres and all these brilliant material innovations into products which will have a high level of extrinsic durability. So, and I think that's clear. The aim is not to integrate the best material innovations into products which will be discarded after a short lifetime. So, and then very briefly, if I can still mention the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, which is the expansion of the EU's eco-design framework, which is typically for washing machines and white goods and fridges, to textile products. The law has been adopted, but the specific requirements, both performance requirements, so actually material requirements and information requirements, are still to be discussed over the next few years. So that's something where brands can really engage, and brands and other actors in this room. But I think what's really important, and maybe my last point, would be that it is also important to notice that the eco-design regulation it's a single market initiative. And this links back to the previous panel as well, where we heard from Sandrine Dixon this morning talking about the need to go beyond growth. Eco-design is really a green growth strategy. Yeah. And the key assumption in eco-design is that we need to make products more durable and increase the proportion of recycled content. And from our perspective, we welcome that, but we also want eco-design to recognize the extrinsic durability and the volumes. So so it's really about challenging the assumptions in eco-design and bringing it towards sufficiency a bit more.
Well, and I think that what we're seeing with the regulations is that it is inspiring and action, and the governments are actually at peril of not actually being able to actually have their regulations be complied with, because they're not actively also in the space, kind of helping with the commercialization. So it seems like for any government representatives in the room, it seems like there's an incredible opportunity, be it retooling some of the EPR funding that will come into coffers to be able to help rededicate back that into perhaps helping some of this early stage offsetting.
Maybe I can if I can just add,
sure.
I think for EPR, there's really two pillars that I touched on there: how the fees are raised, so how you raise the fees and how you set the fees, and how that can influence the market. But then equally, as you just said, how the fees are spent, and then this is what's known as the cost coverage in the EPR, and I think. And we do see, and that's where the key shift in terms of moving EPR from beyond just covering the costs of collection, sorting and recycling in a classic sense, to actually funding R&D and I think was mentioned, the idea of collaboration. So how you can have the joined up thinking between the different spinners, pulp innovations and things like that could all be kind of coordinated through EPR schemes. So.
There's so many different things that we could spend all day discussing, but maybe Gagan, just to bring you back in, I know that Sucharu, you were speaking about the importance of partnership, right? Like right through the value chain, and I think that the H&M Group has stepped forward quite boldly within the last, number of months with establishing a multi-year offtake agreement. These kind of like ever elusive, much talked about offtake agreements or purchase orders. And I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about the thinking around that, both as a de-risking mechanism to help encourage the scale of investment that's needed in the space, as well as just, the other business considerations, be it, longer term supply access, given sort of the fluctuations in global supply chains, or whether it was, in part to try and help from a beneficial perspective, pricing access.
So there are multiple reasons. You mentioned some of them, Nicole, that when we go for offtake, the main reasoning behind this is first that the innovator needs volume to even discuss the pricing to come to a commercial level. If you talk smaller volumes, they will never be able to reach the pricing, and they will always be in the R&D phase because their volumes are less, and they will always be in a small batches where their consistency will never achieve the kind of pricing which they can reach because of reaching the maximum of their commercialization. So I think that's one of the reasons where we go for multi-year commitments and with the increased volumes, so that it gives innovators a confidence that they have their capacities booked and they can run for furthermore things than not just running after volumes. That's one of the things that we believe in. And second, obviously, it is about the goals that we have set. If we want to achieve those goals, we have to secure the volumes for those goals also. So we want to make sure that those volumes are secured, and the time that is required to run through the whole supply chain is also immense. As Sucharu mentioned, it's not easy that we just start with a new innovation and tomorrow it's in the market. It's never like that. You have to create different supply chains, you have to create different fabrics, you have to create different products, test their durability. All this takes time. And if you have commitments, it just does not give the innovator, a sense of less confidence towards the brands that tomorrow we will run away. I think that commitment also brings that we will work together to reach that goal. That's where I think our commitment is. And definitely, pricing is a very important fact in this. We are not saying that we have to go with the premiums all over. It's not like that. The industry cannot run if it's every new innovation comes with a high premium. But every new innovation has to scale up to reach a level. Yeah. And that is where we are supporting with our commitments to the innovators.
That's great. Thanks, Gagan. We're going to go to the audience now for some questions, and maybe we'll batch a couple of questions together. We have one over here. Do we have a microphone? We have a microphone running in your direction. If other folks have questions, if you can pop your hand up as well.
Thank you. A relatively straightforward question, I would think. I've been surprised by a statement made from the panel that there is a varying amount of recycled material, and the figures quoted were 10%, 30%, 50%. I work a lot in performance apparel. We talk about 75, 80, 90%, if not 100% recycled. Is the fashion industry really saying you can't use proper recycled materials? You're just doing tokenism?
Well, the sign of a good panel is is always to be, I think, 30% more provocative than you would normally be. And I think kind of the framing of that question is perfect as a kickoff.
May I?
Yes.
So I would like to clarify.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the space of man-made cellulosics, which is chemical recycling. It's different when a chemical recycled fiber is mixed with, say, mechanically recycled cotton. You can definitely go up to 50% mechanically recycled. We, as a fiber producer, have made 100% recycled viscose, 100% recycled lyocell. It's to the degree of the quality of the feedstock that's available. Now, the feedstock is in turn dependent upon the degree of contamination in the material. That's dependent upon, A, the fiber segregation technology. Today, we don't have robust answers for polyester and spandex in our clothing. And that's something for the brands as well to work upon, as also for the material innovators as they're looking for textile to textile recycled polyester, which can then be broken down back into the chips and come back, as well as the using 100% say lyocell threads instead of using chain poly or cotton poly threads, which so you have seams being taken out, etc., before it's going today. This space is going to evolve, and to your point, Nicole, on impact, that's all going to help reduce the prices. But today's reality is pulp contamination and the quality of pulp is determining the quantity, the quality, and the number percentage that we as a chemical recycler can make. We can make 50, we can even make 100. Is there pulp out there which is today at that speed? It will be tomorrow, but that's not today's reality.
Yeah. And I think our collective job is to compress that timeline as quickly as possible, right? Any other questions?
Yes.
There's someone over right at the back over there. Fantastic.
Hello, thank you very much for the interesting panel. Paulo Fernandez, PwC Germany. I have a question to Emily. You talked about...
Can you speak a
I
little
can't
bit
hear
louder?
anything.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect.
Paulo Fernandez, PwC Germany. Thanks for the interesting panel. Emily, I have a question to you. You talked about the two legislations, the Waste Framework Directive and the Eco-Design Framework. When will we see quotas in the Waste Framework Directive or in the Eco-Design for next-gen recycled material?
So just, you're asking when will we see quotas for
Yes.
next year? Okay. So I don't think we will see quotas, but the way that, in terms of the eco-design framework, there will be what's called performance requirements. So, and in those performance requirements, they could be fiber specific or fiber neutral. I think they will probably be fiber neutral, which in our opinion is not the best approach, but we could have fiber specific requirements where you would have, by different types of material, you have fiber specific requirements. And then, but in terms of quotas, I think what we've also been campaigning for is a EU approach to sustainable resource management. So that would be looking at how, as part of a broader resource management strategy, really bringing a focus on our material footprint, and with that, having a sector-specific strategy for the textile sector. And in there, you could have quotas for each type of fiber or the fiber basket, if I understand your question, quotas. But I don't think there would be quotas within the in the eco-design regulation.
Can we get the other mic moving? I think we have a question down the bottom whilst we're waiting for the mic at the back to be reactivated. Great.
Thank you. Emily, this is for you as well.
Oh,
I can hear you.
hot seat.
Can you hear
the
me?
hot seat.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the renewable energy sector, governments really stepped in to provide subsidies, feed-in tariffs, a whole bunch of monies that was coming in from the Chinese government, the North American governments, European governments, so that the first to market solar and wind energy actually was able to sell to the market at price parity, even though it was produced at a price premium, right? So they shaved off that extra premium in order to stimulate the market. And I don't actually see that happening with any government anywhere currently. And I'm wondering if that's being discussed.
I think you're right. I don't think it's being discussed. I think that's probably also because the movement for regulation on the textile sector at the EU level anyway has come from product policies. So this is really, and I think what you're speaking of is something much broader. So that's kind of why we, we have the textile strategy, but we also have to be honest about its limitations. And it's really only, it has these two legislative arms, the eco-design aspect and the waste aspect, and then a lot of other less impactful measures, yet it's being sold as a huge political response to exploitation, labour exploitation and overproduction. So I think we do need more measures that recognise those actual market realities. And I think what you all mentioned also makes me think of the previous panel where they spoke about fossil fuel subsidies. And I think that's also a really important point, because the EPR is trying to do, to some extent, what you're saying, and we also have to be realistic about the limitations of EPR, because again, it's a green growth measure. But there's only so much EPR can do if it's coming up against the perverse subsidies to fossil fuel industry. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think the basic takeout is there's plenty of space for government to be able to step in, right? And there are an existing set of tools that could just be adapted to a new production supply chain.
Yeah. And also, just the final point, we also saw earlier in the introductory remarks the overview of the European Parliament after the last elections, and I think it's just really important to keep. That was a more, in the previous parliament or the current one we're just coming out of, it was a more favourable parliament and a more favourable political climate. We had the European Green Deal to these types of initiatives. So I think it's going to be harder, and I think they need to keep up the momentum for regulation.
Right.
I think maybe, sorry, just to add to that, I think it's obviously important, and there definitely is a need for legislation to step in to kind of set a minimum requirement. But I think as an industry, we should also be striving to achieve more than what we are being told we need to.
Yes, true.
And I think there are a lot of conversations already happening within the private sector and with philanthropic organizations to build these pools of capital and to offset that premium. So not just wait for legislation to come, because that politically is sometimes quite difficult to get done, and also takes a lot longer to happen than what the private sector can do it.
I'm so glad you jumped in, Frans, because I was just about to say, Frans, I think this is like partly in design, part of the design for the Next Gen Transition Fund, right? That Fashion for Good and Canopy are working on together, is just recognizing that it's not just for government, and government tends to move slowly, and this is a space that is moving very quickly and needs solutions deployed now or tomorrow, as the case may be. We're coming into our last couple of minutes. I'd like to just offer the opportunity for all of the panelists to maybe pull out one key thing that you're hoping that everybody here in the audience kind of takes out of the discussion, maybe connects with somebody else to discuss further, reaches out to one of us collectively. Maybe Gagan, we can start with you. I know that with being on screen, sometimes you're a little bit front and center, less front and center.
No, but I would like to, such a great discussions everywhere. I think two parts I would like everybody to take. One is the work that we can do and we should do and not wait for the government. So, or as brands, whether it's big, whether it's small, work towards the next gen fibers and the commitment you have to show from yourself. That's one part which is internal, which brand can do it and can take it forward. But the second part is also externally, we need philanthropic, we need government policies to support these innovators so that it can take it to a completely different level. Decades and decades, we have been working with conventional fibers. So if we want innovators to come up in 7 to 10 years, it needs support. So we all have to come together and do this.
Great. Thank you, Gagan. Emily, we'll go to you.
Yeah, so last point would be, yes, I'm interested to chat to anyone about this aspect, is really the role of fibers and next-gen fibers and material innovations in building these products which have this high level of emotional durability, and how we can build that into policy. So
great.
That would be my last point.
Thank you.
So I think my big takeaway would be how to be a catalyst. I mean, look at it, Fortania. We all need the next generation materials, whether it's lesser reliance on existing sources of pulp, whether it is looking for our product not going to landfill and being recycled and reused back, The EPR speaks about that. How is it a closed loop? So look at it far to near. Let not the current price or the age challenges of initial innovators be a derailer, but let that be, each of us be a catalyst to galvanize, work cohesively, work across the industry to come up with solutions which haven't been. Look at long-term to an earlier price discussion. Look at a long-term price deal, not today's price alone. Look at long-term adoption and look at a balance of material which is conventional and next generation, sustainable and next generation in the same sphere so that we're able to accelerate this movement.
Great. Frans?
I guess the easy answer is collaboration. It's something that's come up in so many of our conversations, but I think there's so many different ways you can approach it, whether it's from an investor point of view, how do you work with other investors to build a capital stack that can really drive a company forward? How can those investors work with brands and supply chain stakeholders to understand where the risks are, to best allocate those risks so that the people that are best placed to manage that risk take ownership of it, and to realize that we are still very much at the early stage of a transformative process. There's still a long way to go, and collaboration now will help us to identify what potential other hurdles there might be, and what other collaborations we need to put together in order to solve for those.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'll just close out by saying I think the themes that have been brought up today, we're going to hear them in this session, we will hear them in other sessions, I'm sure. I think just to pick up on Gagan's point, like now is the time, like everybody can do something, however big, however small. My encouragement is that we all stretch. Everybody within the next month, do something that feels a little uncomfortable. You know, whether you're an investor, whether you're in a brand, whether you're within government, there's something that all of us can do, and we do need to be redesigning the way that we do things. We can't just do business as usual or the way that we've always done things. So if that means joining and reaching out to, be it Fashion for Good or Canopy around kind of like the Next Gen Transition Fund, or to Canopy for Streamline 30 to help secure those economies of scale of production for early stage pull-through, like engaging around policy initiatives and how to sort of help incentivize government into the space. There's so much that can be done. If we can break out of our silos to make them happen, then I think that's one of the reasons behind this space. So thanks everybody for being here and all that you're doing.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. If you please leave your headsets behind on the seats, will be fine. Just please don't wander off with them.